Powerless generally don't give you power.
In May, Kennedy scores victories in the Indiana and Nebraska primaries, but loses Oregon to Senator Eugene McCarthy. This sets the stage for the crucial California primary on June 4th, a make-or-break contest. It is a hard-fought campaign. To unwind, he spends primary day relaxing at the Malibu home of a friend, John Frankenheimer, who directed the political assassination thriller The Manchurian Candidate in 1962. The senator considers staying there and skipping his planned victory celebration at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. But when reporters refuse to come to Malibu, he reluctantly agrees to go to the hotel. When he arrives, he is protected by,
I believe, is precisely where hope begins. Why President Kennedy was murdered can be, I believe, a profound source of hope to us all when we truly understand his story. Now, how can that possibly be? The why of his murder as a source of hope. Let's begin with the way Kennedy himself looked at the question. One summer weekend in 1962, while he was out sailing with friends, President Kennedy was asked what he thought of 7 Days in May. You remember 7 Days in May? A best-selling novel to describe the military takeover in the United States. JFK said he'd read the book, and as you know, he was a very fast reader. And he came back the next day, and he said, yes, he'd read it, and then he discussed with his friends the possibility of their seeing just such a coup in the United States. These words were spoken by him after the Bay of Pigs and before the Cuban Missile Crisis. He said, it's possible. It could happen in this country, but the conditions would have to be just right. If, for example, the country had a young president and he had a Bay of Pigs, there would be a certain uneasiness. Maybe the military would do a little criticizing behind his back, but this would be written off as the usual military dissatisfaction with civilian control. Then if there were another Bay of Pigs, the reaction of the country would be, is he too young and inexperienced? The military would almost feel that it was their patriotic obligation to stand ready to preserve the integrity of the nation. And only God knows just what segment of democracy they would be defending if they overthrew the elected establishment. Pausing a moment, he went on. Then if there were a third Bay of Pigs, it could happen. Waiting again until his listeners absorbed his meaning, he concluded with an old Navy phrase, but it won't happen on my watch. Let's remember that JFK gave himself 3 strikes before he would be out by a coup, although he bravely said it wouldn't happen on his watch. As we know, and as the young President John Kennedy knew, he did have a Bay of Pigs. The president bitterly disappointed the CIA, the military, and the CIA-trained Cuban Exile Brigade by deciding to accept defeat at the Bay of Pigs rather than escalate the battle. Kennedy realized after the fact that he'd been drawn into a CIA scenario whose authors assumed he would be forced by circumstances to drop his advance restrictions against the use of U.S. combat forces. He had been lied to in such a way that in order to win at the Bay of Pigs, he would be forced to send in U.S. troops.
The X factor, whatever that thing is that made Lincoln Lincoln, and I've always believed we can't fully explain what made Lincoln great. There was something inborn within him. The way you can't explain Shakespeare, you can't explain Mozart fully. Lincoln had an X factor of genius. How else could someone with a first-grade education write those wonderful things that we still remember today? JFK had an unforgettable charisma. You can see it in the press conferences, in the films. When JFK gave that first inaugural address, we remember it today because it was so charismatic, so wonderful. Remember JFK giving the speech at American University about the pact with the Soviets for nuclear arms. When he says, communism is repugnant to the freedom and dignity of man. Is that not Lincoln saying, as I would not be a slave, I would not be a master? If slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. Lincoln and Kennedy were absolutely committed to their view of the world. I've said before that Abraham Lincoln is one of the greatest killers in American history. Both he and Jefferson Davis share that title. Lincoln would have sent 2 million soldiers to their deaths to vindicate those principles of free elections, liberty, and union. Lincoln was not the kindly father Abraham, always looking to get along. Lincoln was ruthless when he believed he was fighting for essential and undeniable principles. JFK felt the same way. They were both cool. They had analytical minds. They weren't hotheads. Both had few real friends. They were private and distant, very much like Ronald Reagan. JFK and Lincoln were very private people and detached. Many people thought they knew them. Very few did.